Hey friends, my name is C and welcome to a new video for IGCSE Geography playlist. And today we have 1.1 Population Dynamics. And these are the specifications from the website itself, from the CIE website. And here are the case studies. There are 4 case studies for a country which is overpopulated, underpopulated, a high natural growth rate, and a low natural growth rate. And we'll start off by looking at the rapid increase in the world's population. So here are some bullet points and some notes and a graph right here. So during the early periods, the global population was really low, and it's because of the Industrial Revolution that the carrying capacity of the land improved, meaning that more people can be supported and therefore the population increased by a lot. So in present day, this is called the population explosion, which is basically describing the rapid increase of the Earth's population. And in present day, like now, the global population is around 8 billion, and it's estimated to be increasing at 70 million people per year. And note that even though the global population is still growing, the rate of growth is slowing, and the rate of growth in 2011 is around 1.1%. And so this graph right here shows the world population by region, including United Nations projection. There's split by continents. There's Africa right here, Asia, and the other continents. And the present day is around here, and there's projections up to the year 2100 right here. So here are the reasons for the rapid increase in population. So here are some key terms for starters. There's birth rate, death rate, the rate of natural change, population growth rate, immigration rate, emigration rate, and the rate of net migration. And it's quite important that you know these key terms because these key terms are quite common in the theme 1, population and settlement, so it's quite important that you know these terms. And people often get immigration and emigration confused because of how similar they look, but the meaning is completely different. So immigration rate is basically describing the number of immigrants per thousand population entering a receiving country a year, whereas emigration is the number of immigrants per thousand population leaving a country of origin in a year, right? So just imagine a country right here, like a country. If people go into the country, they are called immigrants, right? You can thought of immigration as the in-migration, like in-migration. So immigration. And for the emigration, you can thought of the people leaving, the exit migration, like exit migration, so emigration. So these are the key differences. So here are some reasons for the rapid increase. The birth rate is greater than the death rate as healthcare improved, and the immigration rate is greater than the emigration rate, meaning more people move into the country than outside the country. And this is due to things like better job opportunities or better healthcare or different things that pull people into a country. So here we have the demographic transition model, or the DTM. So this is a DTM right here, where it's split into 5 different stages. We have the high stationary, early expanding, late expanding, low stationary, and declining. So here's some notes. The DTM is a way to explain the causes of a change in population sizes, and the model is a simplification of reality, as the broad generalizations are made to fit countries into certain bands. And the DTM is the historical shift of birth and death rates from high to low levels in the population. So let's just look into this DTM right here. So we have this red line which shows the total population. Let me just zoom in. Yeah, so we have the red line which shows the total population. So as you can see, from the first stage, the population is quite low. And as a country develops, which they move across the band to stage 4 or stage 5, you can see that their population increases, and at the end of stage 4 or at stage 5, it starts to decrease. And this is due to the birth rate and death rate. So looking at these 2 lines right here, the birth rate line, which is shown in like a light blue, and death rate is shown in black or like dark blue. You can see that at the start, at stage 1, birth rate and death rate are almost similar, but birth rate is slightly higher than death rate, which means that the population increases slightly, but not that much. But at stage 2, where it's an early expanding stage, birth rate remains almost constant, but death rate decreases. And this is due to better healthcare and better water sanitation, and lower infant mortality rate, which means that the death rate decreases and the birth rate stays the same. And this prompts the total population to increase due to more birth rates than death rate. And moving on to stage 3, we have the late expanding stage. You can see that the birth rate decreases, and this might be due to people focusing more on work, or that people don't want to have as big of a family as they would have in like the early stages, and there could be many reasons for that. And at stage 3, the death rate also decreases, or like basically slows down, so that's why there's also a natural increase in population. And in stage 4, it's almost similar to stage 3, where the birth rate decreases and the death rate stays the same. And at stage 5 is where the population might decline. There are almost like very few countries, so we can't say that for certain. But the birth rate in stage 5 might be lower than the death rate, and this might be due to people focusing more on work as well, or that people prefer to like have smaller family, they have good health as stated here. So moving on, we have some more explanation for the different stages. As I mentioned earlier, that stage 1, the birth rate is high and the death rate is high due to famine and diseases. Stage 2, the birth rate remains high and the death rate declines. Stage 3, the birth rate begins to decline and the death rate and the infant mortality rate decreases. Stage 4, the birth rate and death rate are low. And stage 5, the birth rate fallen below the death rate in mainly European countries, as net migration inflows are declining and people are more focused on working than raising a family or a child. So you can pause and have a read, but I'll move on in a few seconds. And then move on now to factors affecting birth rates and death rates. So there are many factors affecting birth rates. For example, access to contraceptives, education, job opportunities, age at which people get married, the cost of raising children, government incentives, for example, like the one-child policy or like different policies that increase or decrease birth rates, and influence of religion and tradition, because for example, some religions can't use contraceptives, which will increase birth rates, and so on. And there are many factors that affect death rates as well, but the general theme of the factors that affect death rates are the war or quality of diet, as well as poor sanitation, and as well as like average life expectancy and the quality and affordability of healthcare. And here are factors that affect fertility, which is basically the average number of children a woman has during her lifetime. So here are the key terms for the total fertility rate and the infant mortality rate. And here are 4 different factors that affect fertility. We have 4 different, quite different factors. And in other words, in let's say least developed countries or like less developed countries, parents or family would like to have more children, as they will need to account for potentially their infant dying due to poor healthcare and poor sanitation. So that's social and cultural as well. Like for example, in some traditions, they demand high rates of reproduction. And for economic, fertility rates tend to be the highest in the least developed countries, as children are seen as economic asset and work for the parents. For example, the children could be working in the farm with the parents, or working for the parents, or with the parents. So like parents or family would like to have bigger families so that they have more quote-unquote workers. Number 4, we have political. And in some countries, for example, in late 1930s in Germany, governments offer inducement and benefits to those with larger families. And here are the factors affecting mortality. So we have the key term of life expectancy at birth. And here are some factors that affect mortality. So we have diseases and availability or accessibility to vaccinations. For example, there's the huge HIV or AIDS issue in Botswana. And you can see that these are some information about the AIDS issue in Botswana. And yeah, they don't have much access to vaccinations at the time or like present day, and that's why HIV or AIDS is quite a common thing in Botswana. And there's access to healthcare as well, and the economic status, for example, poverty. And here are some causes of decline in mortality rates in developing countries. There's improved healthcare, improved access to clean water and sanitation, and public health programs. And this is linked to the spread of education, as public health programs educate people about different things, for example mortality rate, or like how to take care of yourself. And moving on, we have our first case study, which is Kenya, which is a country with a high rate of natural population growth rate. So here's some information about Kenya. We have the full name, the country's population, the direct consequences, which is unemployment and lack of adequate housing, and some indirect consequences. For example, it may cause corruption in government and an increase in crime. And there's some statistics right here which you can include in your essay in your final exam. So here's some information on the demographic transition model. Kenya is at stage 3 of the demographic transition model, and it has a high number of births per woman, averaging at around 3.4 children per woman in 2020 compared to the global average of 2.1. And it has a falling death rate and infant mortality rate. And here are some information on the high birth rates in Kenya. And this is due to adolescents having sex before age 15, which may result in an unexpected pregnancy, and this increases birth rate. And this also links to the lack of education. And as mentioned in previous slides, due to tradition, some families would like to have more children so that they can work for them in like the farm, or like due to culture. And here's the 70% of the population live in rural areas. And because of a high rate of natural population growth rate, Kenya faces some problems, which are described here. For example, there's overcrowding in school, there's unemployment, there's a shortage of food, and shelters would be a huge problem because as more and more babies are born, they take up more space in the shelter, making people go homeless. And you can have a read at the reasons. And here's another case study, and it's a country with a low rate of population growth, and we'll look into Russia. So here are some information about Russia. For example, the name. Oops, sorry, this is meant to be Russia, not Kenya, sorry. Russia. Yep. So here's the population of Russia in 1991 compared to 2016. As you can see, it's decreasing quite a lot, which we'll go into why in a second. And in 2016, Russia's birth rate and death rate were equal at around 13 per thousand per year. And here are some more information. And here are the reasons for declining population in Russia. And it's due to low birth rate, high death rates, and emigration where people move out of the country. And here are some reasons for low birth rates. There's an increased use of contraception amongst women in Russia, so this leads to low fertility rate as well. And this also leads to abortion rate being high, and it's quite common in Russia. And many Russian women use abortion as a way of birth control. And to add on to these, it's probably because that people would like to focus more on their work than raising a family, as mentioned in previous slides. And due to the low rate of population growth, Russia faces quite some challenges in the declining population. So number one, there's the declining population is greatest in rural areas, leading to many villages being abandoned. And the marriage rates have decreased and the divorce rates have increased. And because of a low population growth rate and because of emigration, the economy of Russia may decline due to the declining population, as the economically dependent people may increase, but the economically active people may decrease. And here are some information of how Russia is trying to increase its birth rate. So number one, Russia began honoring families with 4 or more children with a paternal glory medal, right here. And incentives are being given out, and that welfare benefits will be paid for children aged 3 to 7 in low-income families. So moving on, we have overpopulation and underpopulation. So here are some key terms. So overpopulation is when there are too many people in an area relative to the resources and the level of technology available. In other words, the carrying capacity of the country is exceeded. And underpopulation is the opposite, where there are too few people in an area to use the resources available effectively. And note that overpopulation might not be the same as high population. High population. And likewise, underpopulation might not be the same as low population. Because as we mentioned in our key terms definition, overpopulation and underpopulation has to do with the resources and the population, like people and the resources, where high and low population might not have to deal with the resources in the country. So here are some notes. In an underpopulated country, an increasing population allows taking advantage of the country's resource and the living standards will rise. And the optimum population is where it's between the underpopulation stage and the overpopulation stage. And this is basically the most perfect point where the population level at which the highest economic standard of living is achieved. And it's basically a balance between the population in the country and the resources available in the country. And here are some things that the country suffer if they have overpopulation or underpopulation. So we have another case study for Bangladesh, which is a country which is overpopulated. So we have some information on Bangladesh. It has a population of 169 million and a land area of 147,000 kilometers square as of 2023. This means that its population density, which is calculated by the population, just write it out, population over land area, population over area, that's population density, of around 1,130 people per kilometer squared, and this is 20 times the global average. As you can see right here, it's quite significant. And here are some reasons why Bangladesh is not as economically developed. So here are 5 points. Number 1, it has lack of natural resources. Number 2, it has a high population pressure and a high population density, as we mentioned right here. Number 3, due to the high population pressure and the lack of natural resources, there's an intense competition for the available resources. And number 4, as we mentioned about the high population, this leads to unemployment, or like underemployment, as 40% of the population is underemployed. And the last point is that there's regular natural disasters leading to losses in Bangladesh. For example, there's cyclones and floods in Bangladesh, and they are quite common, and this causes loss of life and destroy infrastructure. And here are some reasons for the large population in Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, there are many Muslim, and many Muslim societies discourage the use of any contraception, and 85% of people in Bangladesh are Muslim. And there may be a lack of education in Bangladesh, which means that there's no family planning, and also it's also due to tradition that families would like to have large families. And there are many consequences of overpopulation in Bangladesh. For example, Dhaka, which is the capital of Bangladesh, has become one of the most crowded cities due to a high population density at 43,000 per kilometer squared. And there are not enough schools and hospitals, which means that there's a relatively high death rate. And because there's little job opportunities in Bangladesh, this leads to a high rate of emigration. And Bangladeshi people move abroad for better job opportunities, for example, moving to Malaysia, where there are currently around 2 million Bangladeshi people working in Malaysia. And there will also be a depletion of natural resources, as Bangladeshi people are competing to get natural resources to improve their quality of life if they choose to stay in Bangladesh due to family or work. And lastly, the land is being lost through rising sea levels. And here are some possible solutions to overpopulation. Number 1, we have improving literacy rate, where we can build more schools to educate people. And we can set up policies where the Bangladeshi government could impose an antinatalist policy to limit the number of children. So there's this term right here, antinatalist. So we have an antinatalist and there's the pro-natalist policy. So basically, antinatalist policy are policies which discourage birth rates or like discourage children, where pro-natalists encourage children. And we'll look more into this later. But as we know, the China's one-child policy is an example of the antinatalist policy. And lastly, we can educate people. And then we have Australia, which is a country which is underpopulated. So Australia has a population of 26 million and a land area of 7.7 million kilometers squared, which means that the population density is around 3 people per kilometer squared, as we compared to Bangladesh earlier at around 1,130. So there's quite a significant difference right there. And here are reasons why Australia is very economically developed. They are resource rich, which means that they have a lot of natural resources and they export raw materials to all over the world. And renewable energy. And Australia has a great potential for wind and solar renewable energy due to a large land area available at the center. And then we have the location, as Australia is located close to the global demand centers in Asia, giving the country a strategic economies of scale. And lastly, they have well-developed infrastructures. And here are reasons why Australia has a low population. So number one, they have a good healthcare, so families are often small. And there's, at the center right here, it's just desert, so there's an uninhabitable land, as 40% of the country is uninhabitable desert. And they also have poor soil, which means that there's little places available for farming. And here are some consequences of the underpopulation. This means that there's only a small labor force in Australia, and the natural resources are not fully utilized in the country, so there will be a low per capita income. And there will be a heavy pressure on transport and education, and food shortage will be a problem as food production may not be able to keep up with the demand. Because we saw earlier that 40% of the country's land is uninhabitable desert, which means that they can't grow like food or like any crops. And as there are fewer people, there will be a little unemployment rate and more people earning higher wages in Australia, which is good for the people living there. So we have some information on population policies. So we have some key terms as we saw earlier about what population policy is, and there's pro-natalist and antinatalist. So let's just look into pro-natalist. And pro-natalist policies are policies that promote larger families, and antinatalist is the opposite, where policies that aim to reduce population growth. And draconian policies are basically laws or rules that are really harsh and repressive on the people. And here are some notes right here, where the government may impose a population policy either to increase or decrease the population, depending if it's pro or antinatalist. An example of a pro-natalist policy includes the one imposed in France, and antinatalist includes the one imposed in China, which is called the China's one-child policy. And we'll look into those two right now. So we have the pro-natalist policy in France. So here are some notes. France's pro-natalist policy was imposed in the 1980s to accommodate the entry of women into the labor force. And here are some information about the policy that the government passed in 1939. And they offered financial incentives to mothers who stay at home to look after their children. And they also banned the sale of contraceptives. And here are some methods that of like other ways to encourage couples to have more children. This includes more longer maternity leaves, improved tax allowance for larger families, pension schemes, and there's a 30% reduction on all public transport for 3-child families. And there could be child-oriented policies. For example, state-supported daycare centers and nursery schools are available for infants starting at the age of 3 months. And lastly, here's the China's one-child policy, which is an antinatalist policy. So here are some notes. The one-child policy was introduced in 1979 by the Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping, right here. And the objective was to reduce the population, as the population was about to hit 1 billion. So here's some more information. So here's the main, or like one of the issues for the one-child policy. Because there's only one child allowed in China, a second child is illegal, right? And this creates this thing called the black child, which is a term used to denote children born outside of the one-child policy, as couples keep them as a secret as it's concealed. And these children, which was the second child, are not registered in the National Household Registration System, and they couldn't use public transport, education, and much more, because they are basically unknown in the society. And here are some impacts of the China's one-child policy. And the good thing about the China policy is that it was quite successful at the time, and without it, China would have 300 more people, which might lead to food or water shortages. However, the policy created a gender imbalance between the number of boys and girls born. So here are some statistics right here: 119 boys to 100 girls compared with the natural rate. I mean, this is because the boys were much preferred in the Chinese families because they carry the last name, so they basically pass on to generations. Right here. And this policy leads to this issue called the 4-to-1 problem, but because we have one child, the child has two parents, and the parents each has two parents. So like it's called the 4-to-1 problem, where when the child gets older, they have to support two parents and 4 grandparents, which is quite a burden on the single child. And on January 1st, 2016, the policy became a 2-child policy. And that's it for this video for 1.1 population dynamics for the IGCSE geography playlist. And I hope you all enjoyed this video. And if you need any learning resources, you can check out my website in the description, or you can type it out in your browser at www.MakesItEasy.com. And that's it for this video, and I'll see you all in the next video. Here's to learning made easy.